64b. At the two dots, about a third of the way down, 2 lines into the wide lines. So we have machlokes here between Rav Meir and Rav Yossi, right? With 2 scenarios. In both scenarios, he had 2 girls from 2 wives. And in one scenario, he said, I married off my oldest girl, an older girl. And the other scenario, he said, I married a younger girl. And in the scenario where he married the older girl, basically in both scenarios, we have a debate between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says everybody is in a Safek Kiddushin, except for except in the case of the oldest, except for the youngest. In the case of the younger, except for the oldest. Rabbi Meir says everybody is not included except for the youngest and the oldest. So if he said an older, he meant the oldest. And if he said the younger, he meant the youngest. Okay, so we have this debate in both directions. The Gemara wants to know, why do we need to repeat the debate whether it's both the oldest and the youngest? It's basically it's a semantic reason. Why? Because if we would have just known the scenario of the older one. Eric, give me a glass of hot water. Thank you. Okay, if we would have just said an older one, so then I would say that the people will often use the word older when there's something younger. So that's why Rameir disagrees, because 3 of them are older than the youngest one. But in the scenario of where he said the younger ones, he meant to say the youngest one. He agrees to Rabbi Yossi. That the younger one they call the only one to get the title of the younger one is the youngest one. Vietnam Bahaf would have just said the debate with regard to the younger one. I would say Bahak Am Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi disagrees with Rameir. In other words, Rabbi Yossi says that the younger means the youngest only in the scenario of when he specifically said the younger one. But when he said the older one, everybody is the older one. He agreed to the opinion of Rameir. Okay. Now is the critical line of the Gemara. The Gemara makes an interesting observation. So it appears that Rameir in general, Rameir seems, when we have a doubt about what somebody says, Rameir seems to take an expansive definition of that doubt, and Rabbi Yossi seems to take a narrow definition, right? And what does older mean? Rameir says it means basically everyone except for the youngest. So that's an expansive definition of the word older, whereas, which is, by the way, a suffix because he only married one of them. And Rabbi Yossi says it's a very narrow definition. Older means the oldest one. Okay, so that seems to be the case. However, the Gemara will ask that we seem to have a brayso that indicates otherwise. Remember, the Rameir savar mochas inish nafshel sfeika. Rabbi Yossi savar loy mochas inish nafshel sfeika. Rameir sort of says when a person makes one of these statements, he means to say it in a very expansive way. And Rabbi Yossi says he does not mean it in an expansive way. He means it in a very limited way, just the oldest or the youngest. But we have a mission that teaches otherwise. The Tanan we learned, it's an interesting semantic discussion here again. The guy makes a neder, I'm not going to eat apples until Pesach comes. What does it mean, Ad HaPesach, until Pesach? It means until the first day of Pesach. Once Pesach arrives, then he's not obligated. Osir Ad Shegia. Let's say he says Ad Shehei Pesach, until Pesach happens. What does that mean? It means you say in Hebrew Ad V'Ad B'chlal. Right, that means it includes Pesach as well. Osir Ad Sheyetze, until Pesach concludes. Let's say he says Ad Pnei HaPesach, until the face of Pesach. What does that mean? Rameir says Osir Ad Shegia. He's prohibited until Pesach arrives. Rabbi Yossi Ad Sheyetze. Rabbi Yossi says until Pesach leaves. So now, in a certain sense, the face of every day of Pesach is the face of Pesach. The face means sort of the front of it, right? Which is true of basically every day, except maybe for the last day. And over here we say, Rameir has a very narrow definition. He says, what does it mean, the face? The face means the first day. And Rabbi says it means all the days, which seems to contradict their opinions over here. Does that make sense?
Oh, contradict their opinions about the oldest and youngest.
Rameir says the first day of Pesach. We're not sure what Panay means, the face of. Rameir says it means the narrowest definition, which is the opposite of what he says here, where the older one means the most expensive definition. And Rabbi is the inverse. Okay. So Amar Chanina Rav Dimi, Amar Rav, Mukhlefes Hashita. Rav Chanina says in the name of Rav, you switch it around. Rav Meir says the face of Pesach is the last day of Pesach. And Rav Yossi says the face of Pesach is actually the first day. So the Gemara says not so fast. Tanya, we learned in the Bryce. 1 second. I'm sorry. On here. Yeah. Tanya, there's a Bryce that supports this notion. Zehaklal, this is the rule. Kol shezmane kavua, anything with a fixed time. This means, let's say, seasons are not necessarily fixed, right? They're fixed in the interval. They're not fixed on the day that they happen, right? Does that make sense? Let me clarify that in the Hebrew calendar.
Yeah,
this is not in the Julian calendar. However, what's fixed on the Hebrew calendar are let's say holidays, right? They happen on the same day every single year. So Kol Shezmane Kavua, anything that has a fixed date. V'Omer, and he says Ad Pnei, until the face of that date. Rav Meir says Ad Sheyetze, until it concludes. Rav Yossi Ad Sheyagia, until it arrives. In other words, the moment it arrives, that's when the neder is valid. So again, this Bryce clearly indicates like the revision of the Mishnah.
It's on 64, Rabbi.
3 lines from the bottom. Last 2 words in the line. Amar Abaya. Machlokes b'shtei kitei bonus is 64b, second to bottom line.
64b.
64b, second to bottom line. Machlokes b'shtei kitei bonus. Aval b'kat achas divrei hakol gedola mamish getana mamish. 1 second. Okay, so Abaya explains as follows. The debate here between Rav Yossi and Rav Meir is specifically by 2 groups of daughters. What happens if there's only one group, but there's multiple daughters? It's not just 2. It's, let's say, 3 or 4. Divrei hakol, everybody agrees. Gedola, the older one means the oldest one. Ketana, the younger one means the youngest one. And Emtsayis, the middle ones mean the middle ones. You'd say them by name. Emtsayis b'shmakar, you call them the middle children, right? Amrle Rabbi Masal Abaya. So Rabbi Masal says to Abaya, El Me'at, if that's the case. Emtsayis shebekat shniya tishtari. When the Mishnah says, in Rameir's opinion, the guy says, I married off my older daughter. And we say this includes his 2 older daughters from the first wife and his older daughter from the second wife. Now, if that's the case, it should be the middle daughter should be permitted because you'd call her a middle daughter. If he had 3 daughters in the second wife, it's not just the youngest that's permitted, but it's also the middle one that's permitted. So Gemara says, there's only 2 children, an older and a younger from each wife. So it's 4 children total. Where this makes sense, because if there was a middle child, the Mishnah should have mentioned it. The Mishnah doesn't mention it. The Mishnah implies there's only 4 children here, two from each wife. According to this reasoning, the middle child. 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Now, according to the reasoning of the Gemara, that the middle child would be permitted, in other words, according to the question Rav asked on Abaya, he said, "What happened to the middle child? Why did the Mishnah mention the middle child of the second marriage, where it should be permitted? The middle child of the first marriage would certainly be prohibited. She's included because she is older, right, than the youngest child of the second marriage. So the older woman has 3 children, 3 daughters. The younger woman has 2 children that are both 2 younger daughters. So then everybody's prohibited except for the youngest, including the middle older child, because she's older than the youngest child, right? And Mikatani law, the Mishnah wouldn't mention it. So the Gemara says Haki Hash. There's no comparison. Hasan Tanik Tana Dida Isura. Okay. So in other words, in the scenario where there's 5 children, right, of which 3 in the older group, 2 in the younger group, and he married the younger one. So Rameir says, look, Tanik Tana Didala Isura. He says that everybody who is basically all the children from the first wife are prohibited, even the younger one. Why? Because she's still older than the youngest one of the second marriage. And therefore that tells you that even if the younger one's included, certainly the middle one's included, because she's older than the younger one. So obviously that would be different, because the Mishnah is saying basically everybody who isn't the youngest. However, so in other words, let's try to explain this. So you have 3 older ones, 2 younger ones. Right. The Mishnah says the youngest one permitted. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. The youngest one is permitted, right? Because he married the older one. Okay. He married the older one. But who do we call the older one? Even the ones that are younger than the middle one are also called the older one. So therefore, the Mishnah obviously would include the middle child in that scenario, and the middle child would be prohibited. However, in the same scenario, he marries the older one, but actually there's 3 younger children, 3 younger daughters, of which there's a middle and a youngest. Then in that case, the youngest is permitted, and the middle one's also permitted, according to Abaya's logic. And that's why the Mishnah should have written it. In other words, when you're talking about the one that's permitted, the one above it's also permitted if there were 3 daughters in the younger set. So the Mishnah should have said the younger one, the youngest one, and the one above it. But when you're trying to go the opposite direction, when there were 3 in the older group, all of those 3 are prohibited. They're all older than the youngest one. If the younger one is prohibited, and she is still, because she's still older than the youngest of the next wife, then certainly the middle one's also prohibited. And that's sort of included in the Mishnah. There's no need to specify it. Okay, so that's why the question Abaya was only from the second set, when the younger daughter is numbered 3, that the youngest and the middle one should be permitted. And that's why we resolve the Mishnah is actually only talking about where there are 2 daughters. Try again.
Who's on first?
None of us. We got no clue where we are in the baseball field.
If you can look at a graph, it's very simple. When you're looking at the one adjacent to the one that's permitted, that should have been said. But if you're looking at one that's in between 2 that are prohibited, there's no need to say that. Obviously, if either one of that group is substantive reason to indicate to you, in other words, because one above and one below her are both prohibited, she's for sure prohibited also. That's obvious. It's only when she'd be adjacent to the permitted one that the Mishnah would have to tell me, oh wow, she's permitted. Okay. That's basically the summary in a nutshell. It's a lot simpler, probably. Okay.
Pretty good one.
Well, look, I understand, but for the sake of giving Jules the extra practice, I think he'd probably like you to go through it at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Okay, you together?
Mm-hmm.
Why force, Rabbi?
I'm
Okay.
surprised there's no
Please proceed.
there's no diagram.
Continue. The rest of Gemara is
Could be.
okay.
Yeah, usually they're big on diagrams and stuff.
I'll relay Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua the Rava.
Okay.
So Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, says to Rava, "HaPesach chikat achas dami upligi." Hold on a second. Abai, he has a very interesting question. Abai is making the statement about the middle child, right? The middle child is called the middle child. 1 second. But Pesach, there are 8 days. There's 7 days of Pesach, right? And over here with 8. But the 7 days of Pesach, what is it? 5 of the days are middle days, right? And if a middle day is called a middle day, and it's in its own category, so then Abai should say, then as follows. Rabbi Yossi says Pnei Pesach means until the first day of Pesach, i.e. until Pesach, before Pesach. When Pesach arrives, you're exempt from your neder. Rabbi Meir says Pnei Pesach means until Pesach concludes, but what he actually should say is the middle days are called the middle days of Pesach. It should actually be until the second day of Pesach. In other words, until the middle days of Pesach, basically. The Chikat Achas Dami Pligi. He says no. The debate of Pesach is not would not include a middle days as its own category, because it's a semantic question of what the word Pnei means. Marasavar ad Pnei Pesach ad Kame Pescha. Marasavar ad Demifni Pescha. Once as Pnei means the face of would be the day before, i.e. prior to Pesach, and the other one says ad Demifni. Same word Pnei. But this means actually the opposite. Mifni means until it concludes. Until it was kipana, until it concludes, right? We say in the Ela, kipana yom, until the conclusion of it. So ad mifni pischa means until the conclusion, and therefore there's no middle days. It's not a subject of discussion. Okay, very genius. Our genius people are coming up with new scenarios here. These are absolutely things you should never do. Okay. Should never happen, but if they happen, you need to know what to do. And then the Gemara actually goes into a very interesting sidetrack here. Okay, Ha'amar Isha, a guy says to a woman, Kidashticha, I've married you. V'hi amaras lo kidashtani. It's never happened. Hu asa v'kroiv itzel, v'hi muteres v'kroivov. He is not allowed to marry her or her relative. He's not allowed to marry any of her relatives because he claims he's married to her. However, she is permitted to marry his relatives. She denies the whole thing. What happens? The opposite happens. He embarrassed. She says, I'm married to you. And he says, like her relatives, but she cannot marry his relatives.
Some people are going to get to dodge the bullet on that one at least.
They have a more problematic situation. He says to her, Kidashticha, I've married you. Here, Maris, he says, and she says, no, like Dashta Elabiti, you married my daughter. Who also bekroivais gedola? He is not allowed to marry her relatives because he claims to have been married to her, the mother. Ugedola materes bekroivov, but the mother is allowed, who he claims is married to her, can marry his relatives because she denies it.
He betrothed the daughter.
No. She claims he betrothed the daughter. He claims he betrothed the mother. So he's not allowed to marry the mother's relatives, and the mother is allowed to marry his relatives. 1 second. And who mutter bekrev is katana? Katana muteris bekrevov. He's allowed to marry the relatives of the daughter. And the daughter is allowed to marry his relatives. Why? Because the mother is not believed. In other words, well, it's true that a father is believed to talk about his son, to talk about his daughter, but a father isn't pertaining to who she married, but a mother is not believed about her daughter. So the daughter is exempt from this whole game. Right? Now the opposite. Kidashta as bitcha. He says he married the daughter. He marries and she says, like Kidashta la'isi, he married me, the mother. Who also bekrevis katana? He is prohibited in the relatives of the daughter. Ukatana mutaris bekrevov. However, the daughter is allowed to marry his relatives. Why? Because we don't. The daughter. His claim about the daughter has nothing to do with the daughter. The daughter is not saying she's married. See, the daughter can marry his relatives. Who mutar b'krovis gedola, gedola asura b'krovov. He is allowed to marry the relatives of the mother, and the mother is prohibited to marry his relatives because the mother is claiming that he married her. Okay. The Mishnah has to indicate when she makes the claim that she's married and when he makes the claim that he married her, but the other one is denying the claim. Okay, so this is very interesting. There's a big difference here when the husband says, I married you, and the woman says, you married me. Why? When the husband says he married her, it basically doesn't really mean anything. In other words, what's he giving up by making this claim? The ability to marry her relatives. He can marry more than one wife, so he's not giving up anything. So he's giving up the ability to marry a small selection of people, of women. However, when she says you married me, she is making an enormous sacrifice. She's sacrificing every other man. Right? Nobody else now can marry. She cannot get married to anybody. The Eshmin Gabi Day, if it would have just said him, obviously we don't believe him. The Gavar Leich Baslay Mikri. A guy won't. It doesn't make such a big difference to a guy to limit his pool by 4 people, or 10 people, whatever it may be. However many relatives she has that are alive. Aval ihi, but her ema ilav the kimay b'dibura lehava amr v'litzer ibikrev. She would not be making up a story because she's effectively giving up her ability to get married by making up the story. So therefore, we should trust her. Kamash Malon that no, we don't. Okay. So she throws the blame on her daughter, right? He says, I married you. She says, no, you married my daughter. Why is this not, why is this different than the beginning? So the Gemara says it's like we said, explained in the Mishnah. A father is believed about his daughter. A mother is not believed. I would think maybe a mother would be believed at least rabbinically. And that's why the Mishnah teaches us that no, even rabbinically, the mother is not believed. Okay. Okay, so now we have the flip side. So initially, the first scenario was, he says, I married your daughter. She says, you married me. And then the opposite scenario is, he says he married her daughter, and she says, no, you married me. Right? First scenario is he married her. She says, daughter. Second scenario is he says, daughter. She says, him. Why does this need to be repeated? It's true. 1 second. I'm sorry. I did the Tana, because we gave the flip side, the first scenario, which was when he says her and she says daughter. We also gave the opposite scenario where he says daughter, she says her. Okay. Okay, fine. Now we get into a first small discussion. Rav says, Itma, Rav Amar Kaifin, Shmuel, first one line is a Shmuel, but halfway down. Shmuel Amar Mivakshim. Rav says you force a divorce. Shmuel says you request a divorce. What does this mean? So ask the Gemara, which scenario is this referring to? Ilema Areisha, if this is going on the first scenario. In other words, the first scenario is he says to her, I married you. She says, no, you didn't. I'm sorry, be the opposite. So she says, you married me. He says, I didn't. So Rav says we force him to give a divorce so that she's able to remarry. And Shmuel says, no, we asked for a divorce. I'm sorry, I missed the line. Sorry, I missed the line. But go again. The first scenario is where he says that he married her. Gmara says like lav kaifanika v'le'mivakshnika. There's no reason to get a divorce there because the woman's never making a claim that she's married. So who cares? There is no need for a divorce. Ella Seif, it's going to the second scenario where the woman claims to be married. The guy says it's not true. Bishlam Evakshim, I understand why you ask him for a divorce so that the woman can remarry. That makes sense. L'chaye. Ella Kaifin, but you're forcing him to give a divorce. Am I? Amar Lanichli, it's a bekreva. He says the story is not true, and I want to marry her sister. Why should I be restrained from marrying her sister by giving her a divorce? By giving her a divorce, people think I actually married her. in which case I can't marry her sister. But it's not true. The story is made up. I'd like to marry her sister, and therefore I'm not giving a divorce. Okay, so the Gemara says you're right. The statement was given differently. This is how it goes. Amar Shmuel, mevakshin imenu litin get. In all these scenarios where the woman requires divorce, we ask the guy to be nice and give her a divorce. Amar Rav says, doesn't get me atzmai kaifin litin suba. If the guy gives a divorce willingly without being asked for a divorce, then we presume that actually what the woman is saying is true, and therefore we require him to give a ksuba. Itmer Nami, you have a brisa also that supports this. Amar Rav Barada Amar Rav Amar Amar Rava Amar of Acha Barada Amar from Nuna Amar Rav Kaifin Umavakshin Kaifin Umavakshin. We force and we request. So the Gemara says Tarati both. How is that possible? Which one is it? Are you forcing or you asking? So the Gemara says Hachakam. This is what he meant to say. Umavakshin and only thing get. We ask the guy in question for a divorce to allow the woman to remarry. But if he gives a divorce of his own will, we force him to give a ksuba, because then we presume that he's actually lying. He really did marry her, and the reason that's why he gave her a divorce, and then therefore we request that he pays the ksuba. And obviously, this is the opinion that holds that there is a ksuba from the time period of Erison. You remember when we learned ksubas? This is a question there. Amar of Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah says, "Hamakadosh be'ed echad ein chayshin lekedushin." Let's say there's only one witness to the Kiddushin. Rabbi Yehudah says there's no Kiddushin at all. This obviously is the final resolution of the Gemara as well. We'll get there. It looks like probably not today. Maybe today even. By my name of Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah has the following question: Shneim maidin mai. Husband and wife, they were in the boyfriend and girlfriend, they were in the forest together. They both come out and they say, "Oh, he gave me a Kiddushin ring." They both admit it. What's the story? So they asked this question to Rabbi Yehudah, and what did he say? He said, "In v'loy v'rafi b'yadi." He said yes, then he said no, v'rafi b'yadi, but he didn't really have a good reason. He wasn't sure of the answer. Itmar Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman says the name of Shmuel. Mekadosh be'ed echad ein choshen l'kedushin va'afilu shnei amaidim. Rav Nachman was not. He wasn't tepid about this. There's zero Kiddushin, even if they both agree.
Page position, Rabbi.
About a quarter of the way down, a quarter from the bottom of the page. First one line is the Kiddushav. And we're at Eisvei Rava, Rav Nachman. Ha'amar le'isha kidashticha. First one line, v'hi ameres. The guy says to a woman, "I married you." Our mission, v'hi ameres, and he said, and she says, "Lo kidashtani." She says she denies it. So he can't marry her relatives, but she who denies the Kiddushin can marry his relatives. 1 second. What's going on here? Are there witnesses or are there no witnesses? If there are witnesses, then why do we believe her to say that there's no Kiddushin? And if Vidaleka Edom, and if there are no witnesses, so then the Kiddushin zero. So then he is not prohibited in her relatives either, because the Kiddushin value is zero. El Lav must be be'ed echad. There's one witness, and that's why we believe her to contradict a single witness. An individual is allowed to contradict a single witness, but that's why we require him to restrict himself from her relatives. So the Gemara says no. The Gemara says no. What happened was he claims to have married her in front of Adam, in front of witnesses. The problem is he claims the witnesses are no longer here. They took a long trip and they're not around. A guy divorces his wife and then they sleep together in a hotel. Bishame says, we do not require a second divorce. Beis says, we do require a second divorce. In other words, why do we require a second divorce? Because they were previously married and they're sort of intimately comfortable with each other. So therefore, we presume that what happened here was that he offered the intimate act as one of Kiddushin. And as we recall, there are 3 ways to marry a woman, right? First mission of Kiddushin. Third way, right? An intimate act can serve as a carnal act legal acquisition of the woman. So therefore, we're concerned here because they're intimately comfortable with each other that if they lay together, that would be an act of Kiddushin. That's the opinion of Beis Hill. But Shammai says we're not concerned for that. Okay. So in other words, Beis Shammai does not require a second divorce. Beis Hill does. Hold on a second. Hey, Chidami, what's the scenario? If there are witnesses, my Tamaida Beis Shammai. What's the reason of Beis Shammai? V'ida leka edim, and if there are no witnesses, my Tamaida Beis Hill. 1 second. If there are witnesses, what's the reason of Beis Shammai? And if there are no witnesses, why does Beis Hill concerned that it might be a valid Kiddushin? Elalav, it must be. There's one witness. And that's the debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hill. If there's one witness who sees them going together into a hotel room, is that witness sufficient to make the Kiddushin or not? So Gemara says that can't be. Why? Ultamech. Because let's examine the end of the brayso. Ema Seifa. Umoidin, but Beis Hill agrees to Beis Shammai. Ben iskar shemina erison she'ein tzrich himenu get sheni. Let's say they only did erison, not nesuin, i.e., they were never intimate with each other. So there isn't that intimate comfortability that they have. Therefore, Beis Hill agrees that there's no need for a get because they're not intimately comfortable. But if you're going to tell me that the scenario here is one witness, and that's why the witness is believed to make a Kiddushin, then who cares whether it was erison or whether it was nesuin? Malim and eris, malim and nesuin. What? Elowat, the debate here has nothing to do with a single witness. What's the scenario? Which is precisely what you might imagine. Typically, the window shades are closed, so there are witnesses who only see the yichud, the fact that they're in seclusion and the door is locked. But there are no witnesses to a carnal act. And then this is the debate. The witnesses of seclusion in a scenario where the man and woman are previously intimately comfortable, that serves as witness of the cardinal act. Sorry, the Beis Hill says that serves as witness of a cardinal act, and therefore there's a legal Kiddushin going on, and they require a second divorce. And Beis Shammai says lo yamin hein yichud hein edibia. Beis Shammai says we don't say that they're the same witnesses, and therefore there's no requirement for a divorce. And Beis Hill says we do say that they're the same witnesses. Effectively, because they've witnessed seclusion of two intimately comfortable, couple people, a man and a woman. Therefore, according to Beis Hill, we say that they require a second divorce because we presume there's an act of Kiddushin. But Beis Hill would agree to Beis Shammai that when the divorce has been from the stage of erison, and therefore they're not intimately comfortable with each other, because of that, we don't presume that they're the same witnesses. Amar Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Maratim Shmei Rav. So Yitzchak says in the name of Rav, even if they both agree, there is no Kiddushin. Kiddushin must be done in front of two witnesses. You do it privately, there's no Kiddushin, even if it's done in front of one person. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rabba Rav Huna says, if a person gets married with one witness, Beidina Rabba Amri, the great Bezdin says, Ein Choshen Kiddushin. There's no concern of Kiddushin. Man Beidina Rabba, who's the great Bezdin, the great court? It's Rav. Okay. The Ikadamri, and some say, Rabba Rav Huna, Rav. Rav Huna says the name of Rav. So Rav himself said that somebody who gives Kiddushin with one witness, Beidina Rabba, the great Bezdin, Amri, Ein Choshen. The Kiddushin, there's no concern of Kiddushin. Man Beidina Rabba, who's the great Bezdin? Who did Rav refer to as the great Bezdin? The Gemara says, Rebbe. It was Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi. Okay. We'll finish this Gemara. Most of Rav Chadvi Barami. So Rav Chadvi the son of Rav Ami, has a very interesting scenario. What's the question here? You have two people that come with a woman and a bag of money. Okay? Shnayim Shabom Medina Siyam, two men that come, V'ish Imam, there's a woman with them, V'chavila Imam, and there's a bag of money. The guy number one says, this is my wife, this is my slave, and this is my bag of money. Zu Eshti, Ze Avdi, V'zu Chavilasi. So I own everything. I'm married to the woman, this guy's my slave, and the money is mine. V'zem, or the other guy, makes the exact opposite claim. He says, Zu Eshti, this is my wife, V'ze Avdi, this is my slave, V'zu Chavilasi, and this is my money. The Isha Maris, and the woman says, Elu Shnei Avdi, these are my two slaves, V'chavila Shali, and it's my bag of money. So the Gemara says, gittin she requires two divorces, and then she collects her ksuba from the bag of money. So the Gemara says, hold on, why does she require any divorces here? She claims she's never married. Why do we believe these two random strangers, who she claims, by the way, aren't even kosher witnesses because they're slaves? So the Gemara says, if each of the two men have witnesses, can she claim that they're both her slaves? Obviously not. And the money is hers. It must be. Everybody here has one witness. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says that doesn't make any sense either, because even if they did have one witness, the woman still believed against a single witness. It doesn't change the fact the woman would not require a divorce. What about the fact that there's two single witnesses opposing her, one claiming that he's the husband, the other one claiming the other guy's the husband? It doesn't make a difference. Okay. Everybody agrees that she's permitted to remarry. Over here, what we mean to say is as follows. If she wants to be able to collect a ksuba from the bag of money, in other words, what do we do with this bag of money? We don't know what to do with it. We don't know. Three people are making claims. We lock it up, we wait till Yonavi tells us who owns the bag of money. But there's another alternative. If they both give her divorces, then we say, well, at least she's entitled to 200 zuz of that bag of money. So the Mishnah is basically saying, if they both gave her divorces, then we would be able to give her the money from the bag, 200 coins. According to the opinion of Rameir, that says you can collect a ksuba even from movable objects, from cash, as opposed to lands. Okay. My Havala, what's the final conclusion? Or if Kahana Omer Ein Choshen Kiddushin. If Kahana says we're not, no, we'll leave that for tomorrow. Okay, have a great day.